Hi everyone, I'm Mrs. X. I was talking to some friends of mine tonight about a particular strange experience I had, and one of them said, "Well, write that down. You ought to write that down." And the other said, "I ought to record it on video." And so here we are. It's on video. Um, to give you some background, real quick. Um, Back in my 20s, and I'm in my 50s now. Back in my 20s, I had a series of incidents happen to me that were just flat out paranormal. And I mean, one can think whatever one wants to think, one can believe whatever one wants to believe. All I can tell you is that I believe what I'm about to tell you, and I experienced what I'm about to tell you. Take that for what it is. Um, uh, and it's this last one, this most recent one that happened a couple months ago that I was telling my friends about because they've heard all this crap from the earlier stuff before. But it was this last thing that I'll get to eventually that that they wanted to record, and so that's what this is. Um, it started back in my 20s with a close encounter with a UFO out in the middle of the wilderness, out in the middle of the night. It was really upsetting. um, I wonder if I should go into that. Just real quick, I was with a friend. I was just upstream, just a little upstream from a waterfall here in a local creek called Middle Creek, and it was nighttime. And we were doing a long hike from the top of Edwards Point down the canyon off the trail back down to Captain Pass's place at the bottom of the river, where the river meets the river, and he had his Ducati stashed there, and that's how we got there, and that's how we were going to drive back. And we were a little above the falls, Rainbow Falls. It's been about the summer of '84, and we were above the falls. It was night, and this bright light came kind of across the edge of the forest. Right there where the falls are, there's this big bowl in the land where everything drops off, and the creek continues on from there. But there's this big, and this light kind of scooted around the side of this bowl on the tops of the trees, and it stopped about 30 feet away from us. And it was about 10 feet wide. It was glowing white like a tube light. It had no surface features, really. It was like a ball with a ring around it like Saturn, but the ring was a lot shorter and thicker than Saturn's ring. Anyway, this came up to us, and we both started screaming like chimpanzees. I didn't know people, if you freaked them out enough, would scream just like a chimpanzee, but we both were doing it. It was a sort of a wah, wah, wah kind of sound. Anyway, we get very upset emotionally for some number of seconds when it comes to about 30 feet away from us. And across the creek, on the other side of the creek, a front porch swing appears in a down-angled spotlight like thing. And our minds, I went from the most freaked out I've ever been to completely calm in 1 second. Bam, like that. And we were just saying, like, oh, it's just a front porch swing. It's just a front porch swing. We were completely calmed down, not even thinking about the UFO we'd just seen seconds before. And we crossed the creek, headed to the swing as if we were going to sit down on the swing. Anyway, that's all I ended up ever remembering about that. Just about all. And it was like 6 months later that I started remembering this. And then I run into a friend of mine named Sheldon, and I told him about this story a couple of years after it happened. And he was like the first person I told, I think. And Sheldon said, I know someone with the same story. And he introduced me to Joe. And Joe said he was on Middle Creek with a friend at night, and they saw a glowworm off the trail. And that's how our whole thing began. We were coming down the creek, and we saw a glowworm on the other side of the creek. And because I'd never seen a glowworm in the woods before, and I thought, how cool. And we crossed the creek, and we're checking the glowworm out, and that's when this other stuff starts. And Joe was on trail. He wasn't coming down the canyon, but it was about the same time, about the same year. And anyway, he's with a friend, and they see a glowworm off the trail, and they have a very similar experience. Joe tells me this. And so, you know, it kind of freaks me out a little bit. Not a great amount of time after that, I was living with a wonderful lady named Patty. And I got up one morning and sat in front of this huge picture window she had. She wasn't there. I was alone in this lovely house. And sitting in front of this huge picture window in a chair, just looking at the valley of Chattanooga down there below me. And the next thing I know, it's like everything was totally normal. I was sitting in the chair, and then the next thing I knew, I'm watching this scene, this curved scene, like you were looking in a glass ball. And it's a man in a chair, and I'm looking at him from about 8 feet up and about 8 feet back, somewhere near the ceiling. And it's like dream consciousness. I wasn't questioning anything at all. I wasn't saying, well, why am I seeing this? I'm in a chair. It's like I was in the chair, and then the next thing I know, I'm seeing this scene. And I look at the guy in the chair, and I'm looking, and my mind starts to turn. And I'm thinking, yes, that's a man in a chair. Yes, that's a man in a chair. And then I noticed that half horseshoe of light you see in people's hair where it bends, like if you're above them and you're looking down and there's lighting. That half horseshoe of light right where the hair bends there in the guy's hair. And I think, that's a half horseshoe of light you see when you're looking at someone's head from behind. That's my head. Bam! And as soon as it occurred to me that's my head, I get this dump of information. A whole lot of information. It was different than the type of information you get here. It was like you just accepted it as truth. There was no questioning of this information, and there was so much of it. Anyway, that's what I experienced. And rather than go into detail about all that, I'll just say, not too long after that, in my 20s, a couple years later, I was at a graveyard with Patty, the lady I mentioned. And we had brought a blanket. It was nighttime. We brought a blanket. We brought some wine. We brought some pot. We were going to have a great time. And I saw a ghost. I had walked away from the blanket maybe 10 or 20 feet just to walk around a little bit. And I saw what looked like a lady that was kind of whitish, that was in old-timey clothes. And she moved without feet. She didn't step. She didn't have feet. She just kind of moved. And Patty didn't see it. And I saw it, and it freaked me out bad enough, so we left that evening. And then a year or 2 or 3 after that, I'm on Middle Creek with Joe, the same guy I mentioned earlier, who was now my friend in this later time. We're on Middle Creek with Joe and another friend of ours named Greg, who has since died. Joe was in front of me, maybe 50 yards. Greg was behind me, maybe 100 feet. And there's these huge rocks and huge boulders everywhere. And I'm like hopping around, heading towards Joe. And I'm down in a low spot where I can't see behind me. And I'm just about to hop across the creek to catch up with Joe. And I hear in my head, "Find Greg." And I just froze there for a second. I thought, what the fuck? And I retightened my muscles to fire and jump across the stream. And I heard in my head, "No, Jim, you want to find Greg." And I just stood there for a second and went, "Okay, I'll find Greg." And there's this big stone behind me where I couldn't see Greg. I could show you this stone today. And I ran up the stone. I was real good at running around on the rocks. And I just went up the stone. There's Greg coming up the creek, up a spot he's been up 100 times before. There's no problem at all. I think, Jim, you're crazy. And I look upstream to see where Joe is. And I look back to see where Greg is, and Greg was gone. And I thought, he can't be gone. I know the shape of all the rocks there. He can't be gone. And I bobbed left and I bobbed right. And in between the rocks in this little cleft, I saw the color of his shirt just kind of shaking like that. And I ran across the rocks to where he was at. And he had fallen and busted his head. His nose was bleeding. His lips were blue. He was sucking air. It was really bad. And I screamed so loud to get Joe. There's waterfalls and things all around us. I screamed so loud to get Joe that I threw my voice out, or halfway threw my voice out, and just screaming his name 3 times. That's how hard I was screaming. Anyway, Joe stayed with Greg, and I got the Signal Mountain Rescue crew, and et cetera, et cetera. That happened. And I've got these, I run into a UFO, and then in the years after that, I have these occasional paranormal incidents. And, I'm kind of a weirdo for a whole host of reasons. My friends accept me. They even enjoy me sometimes. And so I go on about my life in the decades after that. Pretty much paranormal-wise, nothing more happens. About 6 years ago now, I'm laying in a couch asleep in my apartment, and I'm laying there, and when you're just waking up, and you know you're asleep, and you know you're awake, and you know you've got your eyes closed, you haven't opened your eyes yet, you're in that state of consciousness that I just described, and all of a sudden, my mind yells at me. It wasn't like the voice in my head before, it was my voice. My voice yells at me in my head, open your eyes, open your eyes, open your eyes. It's there, it's there, it's there. And I'm just going, what? And I open my eyes, and I'm laying down on the couch, and about almost 5 feet over my head, over my face, there's this ball, about the size of a tennis ball. It looked like gray metal. And I just saw it for a second, and then it sort of stretched. It moved so fast it looked like it stretched towards the wall behind me. And all this just happened in a couple seconds. I'm going, what? And I look at the wall behind my head, and there's nothing there. There's no hole in it or anything. And okay, whatever. And you go about your life after that. And the thing that they told me I should tell you about was this thing that happened after years. This thing that happened about 4 months ago, 3 months ago. The whole reason my friend Scott's making this film is this next thing. It's been 6 years, nothing paranormally's happened to me. Well, I had a thing where I was with Darlene, the mother of my child. I had a thing where I was in her house and I thought I saw someone there, but that was just like out of the side of my eye. It was really weird, but that wasn't, I don't quite classify that with these other things. But about 3 months ago, I've been learning and studying. It's been an obsession of mine since I was about 8 years old. What is the nature of reality? What can be learned about reality? What can be understood? Since I was like 8. And so, you can scoff at the information I've come up with and the information I've learned and the sort of tinker toy thing I've put together about reality regarding it. You can scoff at it, as some of my very dear friends do, and God bless them. But this next thing happened about 3 or 4 months ago, and I just sort of said to myself one day, well, this metaphysical proposition is true. At least I'm believing it is. And then, therefore, this other metaphysical proposition is true. Therefore, this other metaphysical proposition is true. Therefore, and I didn't go very far down that road until all of a sudden, and I'm just sitting outside on the patio here. All of a sudden, I came to this sense of self, sense of where I was at, sense of what was happening that was very different than the normal. I tried to examine this both after, during, and afterwards, and I came up with some words for it. It basically boiled down to this. It became so completely obvious that there was no way, no level, no amount of any kind of separation in any form from the ego self, just, the named personality, ego self. There's no separation in any way between that and the source. And being in that experience was euphoric, and it just made your values change a lot. Values about space and time and life and death and things. And I was there for about a minute, and it was beautiful. And one of the senses of being there was that there's no separation at all in any way, of any kind, by any measure, from any part of the ego self, just, your name, your personality, your normal thinking mind. No separation between that and this thing that is so transcendent, that stands so much outside of the objects of space and time, that is so different from them. I mean, as I was telling them tonight, all of the paranormal experiences I've had were like spontaneous. I didn't do them. I didn't make the UFO come up to me. I didn't make myself have a spontaneous out-of-body experience. I didn't choose to see a ghost. I didn't see this ball. I didn't decide that. But this one, I walked myself to. It was like I went da, 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 da. And I walked myself to it, to what I classify as a major paranormal experience. You should have been there, man. And so this recent one was very different from the others. And for the time, I guess that's all I really have to say about it. They just felt, well, Scott wanted me to describe the progression of ideas. When I say that there was no separation between the ego consciousness of the self and this source of the universe, I mean, no separation. There's fucking, well, you would normally think, well, you have to meditate on this for years and years, and you might question it. Is it just a state of organic occurrence in the mind, etc., etc.? Just suffice it to say, rightly or wrongly or bothly, I'm convinced, and have been at least since this incident a couple months ago, that there's no separation. It's right there. It's just as close as it can be. You just have to realize it. Maybe I'll try to put the progression of thoughts down, but that's not really the way to get there. It's like there's no there to get to. It's not separated in any way at all. And I guess that's all I have to say right now, Scott. And there, you can do with this what you will. And thank you very much, y'all, for listening. And I'm going to roll a cigarette and have some coffee. I've already got one rolled here actually.